There are three terms introduced early on in Chapter 1 that are very important to your understanding of this course. They're used in every chapter, or if not every chapter, almost every chapter. These terms are closely related to each other, but there are differences between them. So we've got variables, data, and scores. Let's start with variables. Now, variables probably present the greatest challenge for students in terms of understanding. They can be a little bit tricky to distinguish, or tricky to work out what they are when you're looking at a study that was conducted, and that'll typically be the sort of question that you're going to get asked. You'll be presented with the outline of a study, or the outline of some research that was done, and you'll be asked to identify the variables in that study. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this, one of the easiest ways to identify variables, is just to think about them as being questions. So if there was a survey done with, or if you were presented with a survey that had 10 questions that you're supposed to answer, that means that they are recording 10 variables. Each question, each thing that is being asked from the participants in a study is going to be recorded as a variable. So these questions, or these variables, what they do is they record characteristics the characteristics of each individual in a study or in some research or that sort of a thing. And the whole the reason for calling them variables is that these characteristics, they are free to vary. They're free to change. You can have a different answer to the question from one individual to the next. I try to use the term individual instead of person, simply because you're not always going to be doing studies that involve people. It could be that you have animals as your participants in your research, or you could be doing a study, or you could be doing research on a group of objects. You could be looking at the size of each object. Now, that's certainly not going to be a question. You're not going to be asking the objects questions. You probably won't be asking the animals questions. So questions isn't quite good enough to identify variables all the time. So you can think of any question or any measurement, or any time you're doing a count. Anytime you are recording data for each individual, you're going to be identifying their value for one particular variable. So let's say, for example, I have a number of shapes, or a number of blocks, or something like that, and I'm going to weigh each one. I'm going to get the weight, and I'm going to measure the height, and I'm going to record the color. So each time I record a different thing about that block, that's going to be a variable. So I have 1, 2, 3 different variables. Or if I'm performing a survey with people and I ask them, what is your favorite course that you've taken in the past year, and which part of the city, or which city do you live in, and what's your favorite food? Each one of these is a question. Each time somebody responds to one of these, I'm going to record another variable for that person. So variables basically keep track of a characteristic for each individual in a study. They're often easily identified as being questions, but they could be measurements, or they could be counts. And the whole idea of it being a variable is that it's free to vary from one individual to the next. The understanding of performing the study is that we are going to be exploring these answers. We're not just going to find out what the one single answer is. So there's going to be a number of different answers for each of the, or for many of the individuals in our study. Okay, so that's what variables are. So then what is data? Well, data is effectively all of the answers collected. all of the answers that we reported, we measured, we counted, all of the answers that we got in our study. And that ties in very closely with scores. Data and scores are really just the singular and the plural of each other. So a score, instead of being all of the answers, it's just a single answer. In fact, instead of calling it an answer, I could call it an answer, or it's a single measurement. It's a single individual's. It's the result. It's the result from a single individual. Okay, so to summarize, we have our three closely related concepts that are going to be used throughout the course: variables, data, and scores. So variables are, they record a characteristic. They record characteristics for each individual in a study. They're free to vary. They're often presented as questions, but they could be measurements. They could be counts. Data is all of the answers. It's all of our results, all of the answers or results. So the entire package of results. So if I asked, if I measured 20 objects, then I would have 20 different weights. Some of them might be the same, but I'm going to have 20 values filled out. That will be my data for that study. Or I'm also going to have some heights. I'm going to have some colors. For this sort of a survey, I'm going to have a number of different answers. When you take all of your answers, that's your data. However, if you see somebody referring to a score, then let's just make this singular. If you see somebody referring to a score is a single answer. Scores would be a number of answers, but data is all of our answers. So a single answer or single result from one individual.